Universe Labs Archive, Red Triangle District Archive, 0Y1 The Foundation Framework, Consciousness, Dimensional Geometry, and the Architecture of Creation. Introduction. The Foundation Framework is not intended to represent a machine in the conventional sense. It is a conceptual architecture describing the relationship between consciousness, intention, structure, stability, and expression. Its purpose is to translate abstract psychological, philosophical, and spiritual principles into a coherent geometric language that can be explored visually, architecturally, and eventually computationally. The framework treats geometry as a language, not decoration. Every structural member exists because it performs a specific conceptual function. The geometry is therefore an expression of process rather than ornament. The central principle. Everything begins with consciousness, not matter, not form, not energy. Consciousness is treated as the originating observer, capable of recognizing possibility. Without awareness, there is no distinction. Without distinction, there is no relationship. Without relationship, there is no structure. Structure, therefore, emerges naturally from awareness. The architecture is an expression of ordered consciousness. The spiral. The spiral represents the first observable consequence of awareness. It is not consciousness itself. Rather, it is the first organized movement within potential. Within the foundation framework, the spiral symbolizes origin, potential, recursion, emergence, continual refinement, self-reference, memory, evolution. Every cycle returns closer to the center while simultaneously expanding outward. The spiral therefore represents simultaneous inward discovery and outward manifestation. The center is ground zero. Everything begins here. Everything eventually returns here. Ground zero. Ground zero is not a location, it is a state. It represents complete potential before differentiation. No direction exists. No polarity exists. No hierarchy exists. Only possibility. Ground zero is therefore considered the origin point from which every structural element emerges. The four pillars of creation. The first differentiated structures emerging from ground zero are the four pillars. These pillars extend outward in the four cardinal directions, north-south, east-west. They form the primary structural cross. Within the framework, these are understood as the first act of directed creation: raw impulse, movement, expansion, direction. The pillars themselves possess no judgment. They simply create. Creation without guidance therefore possesses unlimited potential. It also possesses unlimited risk. Raw creation. Raw creation is represented by the expansion vectors. These are intentionally colored red. Red does not symbolize danger. It symbolizes creative impulse, the willingness to become, the willingness to expand. Raw creation produces innovation. Without regulation, it may also produce instability. Its role is therefore to generate possibility, not certainty. The bridge's creation alone cannot sustain itself. Relationship must emerge. The bridges therefore connect the pillars. The bridges symbolize communication, understanding, reflection, integration, navigation, conscious choice. Rather than forcing expansion, the bridges regulate interaction. They create coherence between otherwise isolated structures. The bridges are therefore interpreted as conscious intelligence, not merely thought, but relational awareness. The anchors. Every expanding system requires stability. The anchors perform this function. They descend back toward the earth. Within the framework they represent gravity, accountability structure, agreement, physical consequence, reality. The anchors prevent expansion from becoming fragmentation. They convert imagination into inhabitable form. They allow experience to become lived reality. Mother Earth. Within the symbolic language of the framework, the anchors terminate within the deepest core of the earth. This represents reciprocal relationship. Creation does not merely project outward, it must also return. Reality receives, reality supports, reality responds. The earth therefore functions symbolically as the great stabilizing receiver. The structure is not imposed upon reality. It becomes rooted within it. The outer container. As the pillars, bridges, and anchors interact, a secondary lattice naturally appears. This lattice forms the outer vessel. The container represents coherence. Its purpose is not confinement. Its purpose is harmony. Infinite possibility becomes inhabitable because boundaries emerge. Freedom, therefore, becomes sustainable. Consciousness as architecture. One of the central discoveries within the Foundation framework is that consciousness is not treated as an object. Consciousness is treated as architecture. The geometry simply reveals the organization of awareness. Every structural element therefore represents a relationship between states of consciousness rather than physical materials alone. Dimensional geometry. The Foundation framework proposes a symbolic model in which multiple conceptual layers can coexist within the same overall structure. In this context, dimensions refer to overlapping layers of organization or meaning, rather than a claim about the physical dimensions of the universe. For example, a geometric layer, the visible trusses and spirals; a psychological layer, attention, intention, integration; a symbolic layer, creation, grounding, relationship; and a narrative layer, the journey from potential to manifestation. The same structure can therefore be interpreted differently depending on the perspective of the observer. Changing perspective changes what becomes visible. This is why the shift into the interior viewpoint became such an important design moment. Downward perspective. The greatest conceptual breakthrough occurred when observation moved from outside the framework to standing within it. Once viewed from ground zero, the geometry ceased to become symbolic artwork. It became inhabitable architecture. The observer was no longer studying the machine. The observer had entered it. Perspective fundamentally altered comprehension. The four pillars of truth. As development progressed, a complementary structure emerged. If the four pillars of creation describe how ideas emerge, the four pillars of truth describe how they endure. Creation asks, what can be built? Truth asks, what deserves to remain? Within Universe Labs, these pillars act as the stabilizing principles against which every new design can be tested. They transform invention into disciplined creation. The complete cycle. The Foundation framework therefore describes one continuous movement. Consciousness awakens. Potential begins rotating. Direction appears. Relationship forms. Reality anchors. Coherence emerges. Experience becomes inhabitable. Reflection returns to the center. The spiral begins again. Final observation. The Foundation framework should not be understood as an attempt to explain the universe. It is better understood as an evolving design language, a way of exploring how consciousness, structure, creativity, and responsibility might be represented through geometry. Whether these ideas eventually become architecture, software, artwork, interactive simulations, or simply remain a philosophical map is secondary. The enduring value of the framework is that it gives abstract questions a form that can be examined, refined, and shared. Universe Labs, Red Triangle District Archive, annotation. Consciousness is the subject. The spiral is inevitable. The structure is the output. The flow is the result.